Hello, everyone, at the Interdisciplinary Advances in Affective Cognition workshop. My name is Matt Groh, and I'm a PhD student at the MIT Media Lab in Rosalind Picard's group, Affective Computing. Over the next 5 minutes, I'm going to approach the question of how we can systematically evaluate the roles of context in automated affect recognition. So first, what do we mean by affect recognition? Well, in Professor Picard's book from 1997, she describes emotion recognition as the inference of an emotional state from observations of emotional expressions and through reasoning about an emotion-generating situation. How we express emotion ranges from linguistic word choice to speech prosody to nonverbal facial expressions, body gestures, and physiology like heart rate, breathing rate, and electrodermal activity. What these expressions mean vary depending on the underlying context. Let me share an example. Here's a short clip of 3 different scenes followed by an actor expressing a neutral facial expression. Over 100 years ago, when filmmaker Lev Kuleshov asked audiences to describe the man's expression, they answered hungry if they saw the soup scene, sad if they saw the coffin scene, and arousal if they saw the scene with a woman on the couch. This original video looks a bit creepy today, but recent scientific experiments show this juxtaposition between neutral expressions and unrelated scenes still affects how audiences interpret facial expressions. Here's Daniel Kahneman briefly discussing how we often passively perceive expressions.
And this is this. I mean, you know about this lady that she's angry just as quickly as you know that her hair is dark. And it's interesting to dwell a bit about this. This is not something, the judgment that she's angry or the impression that she's angry doesn't feel like something you did.
A problem arises when we think too fast and rely only on passive intuition without additional reasoning and contextualizing. Is this girl really angry? Or might the additional context that she's blowing out birthday candles suggest she's really happy? In this image, context refers to ambient scenery. In Kuleshov's film experiment, juxtaposed scenes served as context. But what is context? Well, we could call it the high-dimensional feature space describing interrelatedness of elements, but this is nebulous and doesn't allow us to home in on its many dimensions. So one approach to homing in on context comes from symbolic AI. In Leonard's 1998 paper, he describes the dozen most useful dimensions of context from the perspective of ontology engineering for common sense reasoning. Another perspective on context for affect recognition comes from affective science. In a 2019 paper by Lisa Feldman Barrett and co-authors, context is first described as all the unmeasured factors, which is a bit problematic. Measuring something shouldn't define whether something is relevant context or not. The authors do, though, go on to provide examples of the most salient factors that tend to not be measured. These are situational, social, physical, mental, temporal, personal, and cultural. And based on these 2 papers, we propose 7 useful dimensions of context for considering in automated affect recognition. Now, the first of these is ambient sensory environment, which doesn't seem to appear in either ontology. This dimension refers to information about what's going on in the foreground or background of an image, the ambient noise, the temperature, or anything else in the immediate environment beyond the first expression noticed. Now, next is methods of measurement. Are these individuals' self-reports of what they feel, observations by outsiders, or experimentally elicited emotions? What kind of technology is used to collect the data, and how does observation change what is being observed? Related is semantic representation. How do we label emotions and affect more broadly? Do we use categories? Do we use dimensions? And then which ones? Well, it turns out that emojis can be the most useful labels for detecting sarcasm. Another dimension is situational constraints. What cannot happen in a particular situation? For example, you can't stand up while driving a sedan, and by ruling out confounding variables, we can better home in on what a physiological signal might indicate. And temporal dynamics are another integral dimension. Here's a screenshot from a paper where a machine learning model trained on temporal dynamics of smiles can discern frustrated smiles from smiles of enjoyment, way beyond chance and way beyond what humans were able to do in this experiment. And here's an image showing heat maps of facial movement dynamics across cultures. People from different cultures express affect differently. In fact, people often express emotions idiosyncratically, and personalized machine learning models for stress detection and non-verbalized communication outperform non-personalized models. Now, we went through context very quickly. In fact, too quickly. Obviously, context matters. And our question here is, how do we systematically evaluate context in automated affect recognition? The bottom line is we can focus on the most salient dimensions of context, and when we do, we can then better critique and examine its role in affect recognition. Could this be useful for you in your research? Does this elicit aspects of context missing from recent work that you've read? And are there any salient dimensions of context missing from the way we pose this framework? Well, we hope you'll give us feedback on how to develop a framework that is both accurate and useful.